In the dark waters off Guadalcanal, Japanese sailors whispered tales of an American cruiser whose guns fired so fast they sounded like machine guns tearing through cloth. They weren't wrong to fear her. The USS Helena, CL-50, had already survived what should have killed her at Pearl Harbor, and returned with a vengeance that would forever alter naval warfare in the Pacific. This is the story of the ship that refused to die, the light cruiser that earned her nickname through sheer firepower, and the 1,000 men who forged her legend. In an age when battleships ruled and aircraft carriers were the future, Helena proved that a light cruiser, driven by willpower and precision, could change the course of history. The tale of Helena began not in battle, but during the depths of the Great Depression. As America clawed its way out of economic ruin, the U.S. Navy launched an ambitious program to rebuild and modernize its aging fleet. The St. Louis-class cruisers embodied a new philosophy, ships capable of unleashing overwhelming firepower while fast enough to dance with death. When her keel was laid down at the Brooklyn Navy Yard on a cold December morning in 1936, few could have imagined the destiny awaiting hull number 50. The men who riveted her steel plates and welded her armor weren't just building a warship. They were crafting an instrument of survival and vengeance. Helena stretched 608 feet from bow to stern, her narrow 61-foot beam slicing cleanly through the sea. But her true might lay in her main battery, 15 6-inch Mark 16 guns mounted in 5 triple turrets, capable of hurling out a storm of steel. In ideal conditions, each barrel could fire 8 to 10 rounds per minute. That's roughly 150 shells a minute, an astonishing torrent of fire that would one day earn her the nickname the Machine Gun Cruiser. Her secondary battery carried 8 dual-purpose 5-inch guns, equally adept at smashing destroyers or tearing down enemy aircraft. 4 Parsons turbines drove her through the ocean at 32.5 knots, powered by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers producing 100,000 horsepower. With a range of 10,000 nautical miles, Helena could hunt across the entire Pacific. But numbers tell only part of her story. What truly made Helena special was her crew, 868 officers and men who would transform cold metal and gunpowder into something close to immortality. On August 27, 1938, Helena slid into the East River, christened by the wife of Montana's senator. The champagne bottle that shattered on her bow was meant to bring good fortune, though whether it did depends on how one defines luck. Commissioned in September 1939, her early voyages resembled a peacetime travelogue. She sailed to South America, where her crew glimpsed the wreck of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee, scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. The sight of that ruined warship cast a long shadow. Young American sailors couldn't help but wonder if they were staring at their own future. By September 1940, Helena joined the Pacific Fleet and began intensive training in Hawaiian waters. Gunnery practice, damage control drills, navigation exercises, the endless grind that turned civilians into warriors. As 1941 drew to a close, she entered the Navy Yard at Mare Island for upgrades. The Navy, sensing the storm ahead, armed her with new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns, like giving a boxer brass knuckles before the fight of his life. Pearl Harbor, the first ordeal. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Helena rested at berth 1010 in Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard. Across the harbor, battleships sat neatly along Ford Island. Ironically, the berth Helena occupied had been meant for the battleship Pennsylvania, a twist of fate that would save one and nearly destroy the other. At 7:57 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata led 9 torpedo bombers toward what he believed was Pennsylvania. Through the early haze, Helena's silhouette looked enough like a battleship to seal her fate. Only the lead plane released its weapon, a Type 91 torpedo that raced through the harbor, calm waters, at 40 knots. It passed beneath the mine layer Oglala, moored alongside, and slammed into Helena at frame 75 just below her armor belt. The explosion ripped through her engineering spaces like a giant's fist. Boiler room number 2 and engine room number 1 became instant steel tombs. Seawater gushed through a hole large enough to drive a truck through, but Helena was already fighting back. Within 2 minutes, her forward diesel generator roared to life. Power surged to her gun mounts. As Japanese planes wheeled overhead for their second attack, her anti-aircraft batteries opened fire in defiance. 4 bombs straddled her during the second wave, showering her decks with molten steel. The cruiser that should have died stayed afloat through sheer will and flawless damage control. 40 of her men were dead, more than 100 wounded. But Helena survived. In the wardroom, blood mixed with oil as medics fought to save the living. On deck, gunners held their posts even as their shipmates fell. Japanese pilots reported her sinking, a mistake that would haunt them. They had awakened a sleeping giant's little sister, and she would not forget. In the days after the attack, Helena looked like a patient in critical care. Pumps ran around the clock to keep her afloat, while workers patched the jagged wound in her hull. Yet beneath the damage beat a heart that refused to quit. By December 9th, just 2 days later, she limped into dry dock number 2. Yard workers swarmed over her like surgeons, welding steel plates over her torn hull. The makeshift repairs would hold, barely, long enough to reach the mainland. Her voyage to Mare Island in January 1942 tested every weld and rivet. Pacific swells pounded her patched sides, searching for weakness. But Helena held firm. At Mare Island, she was not merely repaired, she was reborn. The Navy had learned hard lessons from Pearl Harbor, and Helena would benefit from every one of them. Her enclosed conning tower was replaced with an open bridge for better visibility, but her most powerful upgrade wasn't a weapon at all. It was her radar. Helena received the SG Surface Search Radar, a technological marvel capable of detecting enemy ships through darkness and fog. Paired with new FC and FD fire control systems, she could now fight blind, a decisive edge in the chaotic night battles soon to come. Under Captains Robert H. English and later Gilbert C. Hoover, her crew trained with near-fanatical discipline. They drilled gunnery until they could load and fire in their sleep, practiced plugging holes and battling fires until reflex took over. Every man aboard understood. They weren't returning to the Pacific as victims. They were returning as hunters. By July 1942, Helena was ready. As she passed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, bound for the South Pacific, her crew lined the rails. Some waved to loved ones on shore. Others looked westward toward the enemy that had struck first. The machine gun cruiser was going to war. The Solomon Islands in late 1942 were a green hell. American and Japanese forces bled for every yard of jungle, and Guadalcanal, with its airfield at Henderson Field, became the grinding wheel of the Pacific War. By October, Helena was part of Task Force 64 under Rear Admiral Norman Scott, a commander who understood that radar and rapid fire, not battleship broadsides, would decide these waters. On the night of October 11, 1942, American scouts spotted Admiral Aritomo Goto's force steaming toward Guadalcanal. 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers escorting reinforcements. Scott positioned his ships off Cape Esperance, ready to spring a trap. As darkness fell, Helena's SG radar operator, Radio Man 3rd Class Robert S. Brown, stared at his glowing scope. At 23:25, a blip appeared. Enemy ships, 27,700 yards out. The hunt was on. What followed was chaos masked as brilliance. A confused order from Admiral Scott placed the American column across the Japanese T, the perfect ambush. On Helena's bridge, Captain Hoover grew impatient. His radar showed enemy ships only 5,000 yards away, but he still hadn't received permission to fire. Finally, an ambiguous Roger was interpreted as a green light. At 23:46, Helena unleashed hell. Her opening salvo tore into the heavy cruiser Aoba, killing Admiral Goto instantly and crippling her bridge. The admiral died believing he was under friendly fire, never imagining Americans could strike with such accuracy from the dark. Then came the storm. Helena's guns blazed at impossible speed, spent brass rolling across the deck like golden rain. Her continuous flashes lit the sea, earning her the title that would follow her to the grave. The cruiser Furutaka moved in to shield Aoba, but Helena's shells found her torpedoes, detonating them in spectacular fashion. The ship burned like a funeral pyre before slipping beneath the waves. In just 14 minutes, the Battle of Cape Esperance was over. Helena had fired more than 1,400 rounds, her barrels glowing cherry red. It was the first clear surface victory for the U.S. Navy against Japan, proving American cruisers could fight and win in the night, the enemy's own domain. At dawn, the sea was littered with oil, debris, and the dead. The men of Helena, exhausted but exultant, had tasted victory, and they were hungry for more. By November 1942, both sides were desperate. The Japanese prepared a massive reinforcement convoy, and Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force stood as the only barrier. Once again, the radar-equipped Helena was passed over as flagship, a decision that would prove costly. On the night of November 12-13, her radar detected incoming ships in Iron Bottom Sound. The waters so thick with wrecks they earned their grim name. Two Japanese battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, led a bombardment force meant to annihilate Henderson Field. What followed at 01:48 a.m. was less a naval battle than a knife fight in total darkness. The two fleets collided at point-blank range. Searchlights stabbed through the night, tracers slashed across the sea, and ships fired on anything that moved. Helena's radar gave her an edge. While other ships hesitated, blind and uncertain, her fire control locked onto targets with machine precision. Her guns roared at what was believed to be a battleship, likely Hiei, just 4,200 yards away. When the destroyer Akatsuki illuminated Helena with its searchlight, it signed its own death warrant. Every American gun that could bear opened fire. Helena's salvos joined the fusillade that tore Akatsuki apart in a blinding explosion, killing nearly her entire crew. Still, Helena kept firing. At destroyers, cruisers, anything that threatened the line. Japanese survivors later swore the Americans must have invented an automatic naval cannon. The battle raged in chaotic fury. Friendly fire claimed Admiral Callahan and Captain Cassin Young of San Francisco, tragic casualties of confusion. When the smoke cleared 40 minutes later, Hiei was left crippled, rudders jammed, burning in the dark. American aircraft finished her the next morning, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Helena emerged with only one man dead and minor damage. Her guns had fired more than 1,500 rounds. Her barrels were scorched and spent. Yet once again, she had helped halt the Tokyo Express and saved Henderson Field from destruction. As dawn broke on November 13th, Iron Bottom Sound once again lived up to its grim reputation. The seafloor was littered with new wrecks, twisted steel tombs marking another night of fury. The USS Helena had proven herself once more, but each victory came with a heavier toll. Between those legendary clashes, her life settled into a punishing rhythm that tested men as severely as battle itself. The Solomon Islands offered no reprieve. If Japanese shells didn't claim you, the tropics might. Fever, rot, and exhaustion waged their own relentless war. The crew of Helena bore the 1,000-yard stare of Guadalcanal veterans, men prematurely aged by constant vigilance. Life aboard the cruiser followed the unending pulse of war. General quarters at dawn and dusk. When submarines prowled, daylight hours spent bombarding jungle fortresses into smoldering craters. nights patrolling the slot. Radar operators straining to catch the faintest whisper of enemy movement. Amid the tension, Helena's crew forged a peculiar kind of normalcy, a culture born of shared danger. Helena's laundry became a legend, somehow delivering pressed uniforms even after the fiercest engagements. Her ship's band, the hotshot Tots, filled the deck with swing and blues between battles, their jazzy renditions of Blues in the Night floating across the dark waters to neighboring ships. Meals were utilitarian: Spam, powdered eggs, coffee strong enough to float a wrench. And when the ice cream machine sputtered to life, a Dixie cup of vanilla became the South Pacific's most coveted treasure. Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, calm and capable, commanded with a steady hand. He sought not glory, but survival, knowing that in these waters, the latter was the truest form of victory. He drilled his men hard, but understood when to ease their strain, hosting boxing matches on the forecastle, movie nights on the fantail, and small rituals that reminded the crew why they fought. But on November 23rd, a bitter blow struck. Captain Hoover was relieved of command for failing to properly report the torpedoing of the USS Juno. To the men of Helena, it felt like a bureaucratic betrayal. Punishment for a commander who had seen them through hell. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, arrived in December 1942, facing a wary crew. In time, his leadership would carry them through their final trials. The months that followed blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion and fire. Through December 1942 and January 1943, Helena bombarded Vila and Munda, supported convoys, and hunted phantom blips on her radar. Her crew learned to read the sea like scripture, to notice the faint shimmer of a torpedo wake or the glint of a bomb S-release. By February, the ship herself was spent. Her engines wheezed, her guns were worn smooth, and her hull bore the scars of near misses. The voyage to Sydney was a miracle, a brief return to civilization. There, her men rediscovered fresh food, cold beer, and laughter. For a few fleeting weeks, peace seemed possible. But war does not pause. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, her guns renewed and her men hardened. The machine gun cruiser still had work to do. As spring turned to summer 1943, the Allies prepared to seize New Georgia, another brutal step toward Tokyo. Helena led bombardments that shook the islands to their roots, turning Japanese strongholds into smoking ruins. Night after night, she slipped through hostile waters, unleashed her fury, and vanished before dawn's retribution. On May 13th, she led a precision strike against Vila, her shells walking through fuel dumps and barracks in methodical arcs. By June, the tempo reached its peak. Intelligence warned of massive Japanese reinforcements, and Helena's decks groaned under the weight of extra ammunition. Men wrote letters home, aware that they might be their last. June 30th, 1943. Operation Toenails. The invasion of New Georgia began. Helena's 6-inch batteries tore 100-yard scars through the jungle as her shells cleared the beaches for Marines. Sporadic return fire found the water, not the cruiser. A week later, on July 4th, as America celebrated independence, Helena rained thunder on Munda Airfield. Her tracers painted the night with democracy's own fireworks. That evening, she refueled at Tulagi. Orders came for another night S-work, to intercept a Japanese Tokyo Express convoy racing through Kula Gulf. The men sensed something different. Perhaps it was the full moon that would strip them of darkness, or the whispers that Japanese heavy cruisers now accompanied their destroyers. Maybe it was simply fate. Helena had survived too many battles untouched. Shortly after midnight, on July 6, 1943, Admiral Walden Ainsworth led Task Force 68 into Kula Gulf. The moon hung like a silver searchlight over calm water. Helena's radar screens flickered with movement. Japanese destroyers approaching fast. Admiral Teruo Akiyama's force carried the dreaded long lance torpedoes, and this time the enemy knew exactly how to counter American radar tactics. At 1:36 a.m., Helena detected the enemy at 22,000 yards. Almost the same instant they spotted her. Both sides closed rapidly. At 1:57, Ainsworth gave the order. Helena's guns roared first. Her initial salvos struck true, obliterating Akiyama's flagship Nizuki in flashes that split the night. But the dying destroyer had already fired her torpedoes. 9 other ships joined her, loosing nearly 50 long lances into the black water. Helena kept firing, radar-directed, relentless, until her stock of flashless powder ran dry. Switching to standard propellant, each salvo now lit up her position like a flare. At 2:03 a.m., fate found her. 3 torpedoes tore into Helena in rapid succession. The first struck forward of Turret 1, a cataclysmic blast that either ignited her magazine or simply erased her bow in a column of fire 200 feet high. The second and third hit amidships, shattering her keel and flooding her engine rooms. Lights failed. The ship groaned, twisting as compartments filled with seawater. Captain Cecil understood at once. Helena was mortally wounded. He gave the order every sailor dreads. Abandon ship. Even so, her aft turrets kept firing. Crews stayed at their stations, shells thundering until the rising sea silenced them. The ship broke apart. The bow vanished, the midsection rolled and sank. The stern drifted free with hundreds still aboard. The destroyer Nicholas, braving torpedo fire, moved in to rescue survivors. Oil-slicked men were hauled aboard by human chains. Dawn revealed the Gulf strewn with debris and hundreds still adrift. Admiral Ainsworth, faced with new radar contacts and looming air attack, made a terrible decision: to withdraw. Over 700 had been saved, but hundreds more remained. For those left behind, July 6th became a day-long trial by sun and salt. Sharks circled. Wounded men clung to wreckage. On the floating stern, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chew took command. He organized rations, kept discipline, and led prayers when Japanese planes strafed them. 2 rescue attempts failed before help finally came. Not from the sea, but from land. Reverend A.W.E. Sylvester, a coast watcher on Vela La Vela, spotted the survivors and coordinated their salvation. With local islanders guiding them, Nicholas and Jenkins returned under cover of darkness on July 7th, 8th, pulling 165 men from the sea. The stern of Helena sank at last during the rescue, as if waiting until her final duty was done. 88 survivors who drifted to Japanese-held Vela La Vela evaded capture for a week, sustained by coconuts and rainwater, until American destroyers staged a daring daylight rescue on July 16th, right under enemy guns. Of Helena's 868 crew, 168 never came home. 700 lived, carried by courage, comradeship, and sheer refusal to surrender. Her legend outlived the war. In Navy wardrooms, veterans spoke of the ship that fired faster than any cruiser ever built, the machine gun cruiser. She earned 7 battle stars and the first-ever Navy unit commendation for a ship, her name etched beside Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf, battles that reshaped the Pacific. Her lessons shaped the fleet, radar tactics refined, flashless powder perfected, damage control rewritten. And in April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel Petrel finally found her resting place 2,800 feet beneath Kula Gulf. Her hull number, 50, still gleamed faintly on the stern. Her guns remained trained outward, as if still on guard. Now, coral claims her steel and fish drift through her silent corridors, but her story endures, a testament to valor, endurance, and the human will to fight on. From her birth in Depression-era Brooklyn to her death in the Solomons, USS Helena, CL-50, embodied the spirit of the generation that saved the world. They called her the machine gun cruiser, and until her last breath, she lived up to the name.